You keep dreaming about them for a reason. Carl Jung knew why, and he feared what it meant. He once wrote that the unconscious never lies. It doesn't send dreams as random stories, but as encrypted messages from the parts of you you've tried to forget. When someone keeps appearing in your dreams, Jung believed it's never really about them. It's about you. He called it a psychic fixation, the psyche's way of circling a wound it hasn't yet healed. You think it's about that person, the one who left, the one who betrayed you, or the one you can't have, but Jung saw something darker. The dream, he said, is not a replay, it's a mirror. That person, their face, their voice, their touch becomes a symbol for what your conscious mind refuses to see. They are the embodiment of a forgotten emotion, a repressed truth, a psychological fracture that refuses to close. Jung discovered this pattern across countless patients. Each claimed to be haunted by someone, an ex-lover, a lost friend, a figure from childhood. Each believed the dream was about longing. But Jung noticed the same shift every time. When the dreamer stopped chasing the image and started asking, "What does this person represent in me?" the entire dream transformed. He found that the psyche uses familiar faces to smuggle forbidden truths. When the unconscious wants to speak, it borrows a mask. Today I'll take you inside what Jung discovered about these dreams and why they can feel more real than waking life. Across his case notes, he saw that recurring dreams about a person often signal a process he called psychic compensation. It's the unconscious correcting the imbalance of your conscious life. If you've denied love, it sends you love in disguise. If you've buried anger, it gives you a face to fight. If you've lost your direction, it creates someone who seems to know the way. Jung wrote, "The dream compensates the conscious attitude," which means the more you suppress, the louder the dream becomes. And the louder it becomes, the more you confuse reflection for reality. That's why you wake up shaken. It's not nostalgia, it's confrontation. He documented cases of people who swore they were cursed seeing the same person every night. One woman dreamed of her former lover standing silently behind her night after night, as if watching. Jung told her, "He is not your past, he is your shadow." The shadow, Jung's most dangerous idea, is the collection of everything we deny about ourselves. Our anger, envy, desire, pride, everything we've exiled in order to appear good. The shadow doesn't vanish, it waits. And when we sleep, it returns wearing the faces we can't ignore. That's why these dreams can feel intoxicating. The person appears vivid, magnetic, even divine, because they carry the energy you've lost touch with. They are charged with your own denied vitality. Jung called this projection of the unconscious content. The psyche takes an internal image, something within you, and projects it outward onto another person. You see them, but you're looking at your own reflection. That's why these dreams feel like both obsession and recognition. It's not that you're meeting them again, it's that you're meeting yourself. When Jung analyzed these patterns, he began to realize something disturbing. The more someone resisted acknowledging their inner conflict, the more the dream intensified. It would shift from tender to terrifying, from reunion to pursuit. The unconscious, he said, will not stop until it's heard. In his private journals, Jung confessed that some dreams feel like psychological possession. The figure in the dream acts with its own will, autonomous, intelligent, merciless. He called them psychic complexes with energy of their own. They are fragments of you that have broken away, and they demand reconciliation. This is why you wake up sweating, haunted, or strangely emotional. It's not your imagination. It's the self, Jung's term for the totality of your psyche attempting to integrate what you've rejected. Every time that person appears, your unconscious is asking, will you see what they represent, or will you keep chasing the illusion? It's a test, and most people fail it. They text their ex. They search for closure. They try to resolve an outer relationship instead of the inner one. But Jung noticed that when the dreamer finally turned inward, the pattern changed overnight. The figure softened. The dream's tone shifted. Sometimes the person disappeared entirely because the message had been received. He wrote, "What is not made conscious returns as fate," meaning whatever you refuse to face in yourself will keep showing up in dreams and relationships in repetition until you finally confront it. That's why you keep dreaming about them, because you haven't yet faced what they represent. And the unconscious, unlike the waking world, has infinite patience. When you've felt that pull, that strange ache, when you see their face in your mind again, you know this moment. It's not madness, it's meaning. Write it if you've felt it too. Across multiple cases, Jung noticed the same pattern. The more a person tried to forget, the louder the dream became. Avoidance was like oxygen to the image. Denial kept the dream alive. He wrote, "The unconscious compensates for what the ego excludes, meaning what you reject in daylight will return in darkness. If you silence the voice of your inner truth, it finds another mouth to speak through. That mouth might carry the shape of someone you once loved, someone who seemed to know you before you knew yourself. But Jung warned the dream figure is not them. It's your unclaimed power dressed in memory." He saw it clearly during what he called the individuation process. Individuation is the psyche's natural drive toward wholeness, the lifelong attempt to unite the conscious and the unconscious. But the first stage is always confrontation. The dream becomes the battlefield. In this stage, the figure that haunts you is not your enemy. It's your emissary. It brings the message you've refused to read. You will know this because the dreams carry emotional charge, humiliation, desire, jealousy, guilt, energies you've deemed unacceptable in waking life. Jung described them as psychic facts. They are not symbolic decoration. They are living energies demanding recognition. He studied soldiers who dreamed of their fallen comrades only to realize the comrade represented their own buried survivor's guilt. He analyzed lovers tormented by recurring dreams of separation only to find that the separation symbolized their fear of intimacy itself. In each case, the dreamer projected their inner division onto another face. This is what Jung called projection of the anima, or animus. The anima is the inner feminine within a man, the animus the inner masculine within a woman. Each person we dream of carries one of these inner figures, the qualities we've disowned. To dream of a lover again and again is to dream of your lost polarity. It is your psyche's way of saying you have forgotten what you need to become whole. When that person touches your hand in the dream, it's not seduction, it's integration. But here's what terrified Jung. If the dreamer refuses the message, if they chase the literal person instead of the symbolic truth, the psyche begins to fracture. The dream no longer heals, it hunts. He documented cases where the dream figure grew darker over time, shifting from friend to stranger, from companion to pursuer. The psyche, unable to complete the integration, turned its energy inward into neurosis, obsession, even illness. Jung called this the possessed state. It's when the unconscious energy overtakes the ego, when you can no longer tell where you end and the dream begins. He warned that most people will do anything to avoid this confrontation. They will stay busy, distracted, addicted, because true psychological work feels like death, and in a way it is. The death of the persona. The persona is the mask you wear to survive the version of yourself built for acceptance. But dreams do not care about acceptance, they care about truth. When the dream figure appears, the one you keep seeing, it's not asking for your approval, it's demanding your authenticity. Jung observed that when a dreamer finally faced their projection, when they admitted, "This person represents my own unlived life," something extraordinary happened. The emotional charge diminished. The dream transformed. The figure stopped haunting and began guiding. He called this the moment of conscious participation. It's when the ego stops running and begins listening. The dream shifts from nightmare to initiation. Jung compared this to alchemy, the ancient art of turning base metal into gold. In psychological alchemy, the base metal is your unconscious material, fear, shame, desire. The gold is consciousness. Dreams are the fire that makes the transformation possible. Across cultures and religions, this process has been mythologized as meeting the divine, other, the soul twin, the lost half. But Jung stripped away the romance. He saw it as the inner marriage, the union of opposites within the psyche. When the inner feminine and masculine finally meet you, no longer search for completion in another person. You recognize that what you sought was always an aspect of yourself. This realization can break you open, but it's the necessary fracture before growth. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The psyche must destroy the illusion of separation before it can reveal the truth of unity." He noted that after this confrontation, the dream figure often changes form. Sometimes they age, Sometimes they fade. Sometimes they simply watch from a distance, no longer a tormentor, but a witness, because their role is complete. The dreamer emerges altered, no longer obsessed with the external person, but aware of the internal pattern. And this awareness rewires everything: perception, memory, attraction. Jung described this as the withdrawal of projection. It's the moment when you reclaim what was yours all along. Your power, your emotion, your narrative, That's why the process hurts, because you're not losing them. You're losing the illusion that you ever needed them to see yourself. Across his letters, Jung hinted at his own confrontation. He too dreamed of figures that terrified and fascinated him. He called it the confrontation with the unconscious. He said it nearly destroyed him, but also made him whole. That's the paradox. What you fear most in your dreams is often the very thing that will set you free. When that moment of clarity finally hits, there's no going back. Some call it awakening. Others just whisper, "I see it now." Once you see the truth behind the dream, nothing looks the same again. The face that haunted you becomes a teacher. The memory that once burned becomes a map. And for the first time you begin to see how every encounter was never random. It was instruction. Jung believed the psyche is an ecosystem. Every dream, every symbol, every person who stirs emotion inside you plays a role in the balance of that ecosystem. And when the dream repeats, it's not punishment, it's calibration. The unconscious is trying to restore equilibrium to your inner world. He wrote, "The self regulates the psyche as the body regulates its temperature." When something inside you grows too cold, too cut off from feeling, the unconscious sends heat. It sends an image, a face, a scene that reawakens the frozen parts. That's why you dream of the ones who make you feel too much. Because feeling is the key to reintegration. You think you're haunted by the past. But what you're really haunted by is your own unlived potential. The version of yourself that could have loved more honestly, spoken more clearly, lived more courageously. Jung called this the return of the repressed, but in the later years of his life he renamed it something gentler, the call of the self. Because once the shadow has been faced, what remains is not punishment, it's direction. After the confrontation, integration begins quietly. It's not cinematic, it's subtle. You start responding differently to life. You pause before reacting. You sense when projection begins to take hold, when you start blaming someone for something unresolved within you. This is the work of individuation, the conscious relationship with the unconscious. Jung described it as the bridge between who you think you are and who you actually are. And the dreams shift again. The person who once dominated them may now appear beside you as an ally. You no longer chase them, you walk with them, because you've accepted what they symbolized, your disowned wholeness. That's how the psyche heals, through recognition, not resistance. Across his lifetime, Jung saw how rare this transformation was. Most people, he said, flee from the unconscious. They distract, analyze, rationalize. But the few who stay, who face the dreams, the emotions, the patterns, undergo something sacred. He called them those who have become real. And their dreams no longer torture them, they guide them. One of his patients described the moment it happened. She said, "He stopped appearing angry. He was just there, silent but warm. I realized he'd never been my lover. He was my courage." Jung wrote that line in the margin of his notes. Courage integrated. That's what the psyche does when it's ready. It turns longing into learning, pain into perception. You begin to understand that every person who has ever entered your dreams, even the ones who hurt you, were expressions of your own evolution. They appeared because you were ready to meet a new layer of yourself. They leave when that lesson is embodied. And when you finally reach that stage, something beautiful happens in waking life. Your relationships change. You stop attracting chaos disguised as love. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy, because you no longer need the outer drama to mirror your inner conflict. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But when you integrate the message of the dream, you stop calling it fate. You call it choice. That is individuation, the emergence of the self. Not perfection, not purity, wholeness. You start to see that the face that haunted you was never against you. It was you calling yourself back home. Jung often spoke of the self as the organizing center of the psyche. the deep intelligence that moves beneath thought, guiding you toward integration. It uses symbols when words fail. It uses dreams when consciousness resists. It uses love and loss as its language. That's why the ones you dream about most intensely are often the ones you can't easily forget. Because their role was archetypal, they carried a piece of your transformation. And when you finally integrate that piece, you feel it a lightness that isn't joy exactly, but freedom. Freedom from projection, freedom from illusion. That is what Jung meant by redemption through awareness. Not mystical salvation, but psychological clarity. The haunting ends when the lesson is learned. Not because the unconscious gives up, but because it no longer needs to speak through symbols. You now speak its language fluently. You no longer dream to escape. You dream to evolve. Every time you wake from one of those dreams now, you carry something back, an insight, an emotion, a fragment of truth. And little by little, those fragments assemble into wholeness. You begin to feel it in your body, a quiet coherence, a peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's presence or absence. Because you finally see the person in the dream was never meant to stay. They were meant to deliver you to yourself. If this awakening speaks to you, comment, "I reclaim what was always mine." Because that's what this journey is. Not recovery from another person. Recovery from amnesia, the forgetting of who you are. Your transformation serves not just your healing, but humanity's evolution. Every time one person integrates their shadow, the collective unconscious becomes a little more conscious. Every reconciliation ripples outward. You become not just healed, but healing. And somewhere in the psyche's vast architecture, Jung would say the dream finally smiles. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.
You were never supposed to carry that weight for so long, but you did. You held on to it because no one ever told you how to put it down without betraying yourself. They told you to be strong, to forgive, to move on, but no one ever mentioned what to do when the hurt never got an apology, when the scars were invisible but kept bleeding under the surface of your smile. So you buried it. You smiled for them. You became quiet for them. And in doing so, you turned that pain inward. You began punishing yourself for what others did to you. And when they told you that forgiveness was the path to healing, you felt like a failure. Because every time you tried, it still hurt. And you thought something was wrong with you. But the truth is, you were trying to forgive too soon. And for the wrong reason. You don't have to forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that doesn't make you unhealed. It doesn't make you bitter. It makes you honest. It makes you someone who is finally choosing themselves over the illusion of virtue. Because sometimes forgiveness becomes another mask the persona Jung spoke of, a socially accepted behavior that hides the truth beneath. You can say you forgive them, but your body still flinches when their name is mentioned. You can repeat that you've let it go, but your mind still replays the moment they made you feel worthless. And that is not forgiveness. That is self-abandonment dressed up as maturity. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And this includes accepting the part of you that still feels hurt, angry, violated, ashamed, small. That part of you deserves a voice, not silence, not spiritual bypassing, not a rushed demand for sainthood. That part of you doesn't want revenge. It wants truth. It wants recognition. It wants you to stop pretending that you're okay just to maintain peace with people who never gave you peace to begin with. Forgiveness isn't the path to healing. Forgiveness is the result of healing. And the healing begins with one decision to stop punishing yourself for what someone else did. It's a quiet punishment, isn't it? The way you talk to yourself when you think you're being too emotional. The way you shut down joy because you don't think you deserve it yet. The way you over-apologize in every relationship because you're afraid of repeating the past. You didn't cause what happened, but you internalize the shame as if you did. That's what trauma does. It confuses the victim into carrying the guilt of the perpetrator. And until you break that pattern, you will keep trying to atone for sins that were never yours. Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious aspects of ourselves that we repress because they feel unacceptable or too painful. But the shadow also contains our truth. And your truth is this: you're still hurting because what happened mattered. It mattered deeply. And you need to stop judging your own timeline. Stop comparing your healing to someone else's. Stop thinking that forgiveness is some kind of milestone you need to reach in order to earn peace. Peace doesn't come from forgiving them. Peace comes when you finally stop waging war on your own soul. You've been taught that being a good person means turning the other cheek, rising above, letting go. But let me ask you something. When you let go, did they ever say sorry? Did they ever try to make things right? Or did they just get away with it while you bled silently inside? Forgiveness without accountability isn't healing. It's emotional servitude. And you were never born to be anyone's emotional punching bag. You don't have to hate them, but you also don't have to love them into freedom while you stay in chains. That's not your spiritual job. Your only responsibility is to love the parts of yourself they made you doubt. This is the turning point. The moment you decide that healing doesn't mean reconciling with the people who broke you, it means reconciling with the parts of yourself that were broken. And that requires brutal honesty. It requires allowing the rage to rise, the grief to spill, the confusion to speak. Because all of it is sacred. All of it is part of the process. Jung never said to deny your darkness. He said to integrate it. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So stop apologizing for your anger. Stop trying to be light all the time. Your darkness has wisdom. It knows what still hurts. It knows where the wound is. Let it guide you not to forgiveness, but to freedom. You've tried to forgive as a way to heal. Now try something else. Try letting yourself feel everything you've been suppressing. Try being on your own side. Try not rushing. Try standing still and saying, I'm not ready to forgive. And that's okay, because you're not the villain in this story. You're the one who survived it, the one who kept going, the one who still shows up for life even when it doesn't show up for you. That is not weakness. That is power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need validation or applause. The kind that simply says, I choose myself now. And when you do that, when you finally stop punishing yourself, you may realize that you don't even need to forgive them anymore, because they no longer have power over you. The pain becomes a scar, not a wound. The memory becomes part of your story, not your identity. And you, my friend, begin to rise, not as someone who forgave, but as someone who remembered who they were before the world made them forget. And now that you've chosen to stop punishing yourself, you'll start noticing something even more important: how your nervous system begins to breathe again, how your shoulders once curled in defense slowly begin to relax, how your inner voice starts shifting from self-criticism to quiet protection. It's subtle at first, like learning to trust silence after years of chaos, like relearning your name without the weight of someone else's cruelty attached to it. But make no mistake, this is the beginning of the most important inner revolution of your life. Not the kind that comes with fanfare, but the kind that rewrites the scripts you've been repeating in your head for years. The script that told you it was your fault. The one that whispered, if only you had been better. Those are lies. Inherited lies. Projected lies. Lies you don't need to keep living under. Carl Jung warned of projection, not just of how others project onto you, but how you internalize those projections and make them your truth. He wrote, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. And that's what happened to you. Someone wounded and unhealed projected their pain onto you. And instead of rejecting it, you absorbed it. You became the mirror of their chaos. And because you were sensitive, empathetic, and open, you believed it. You thought their inability to love was a reflection of your unworthiness. But it wasn't. It never was. They didn't fail you because you lacked value. They failed you because they lacked depth. And that distinction, when finally understood, will break 1,000 chains. You see, forgiveness has been weaponized in many spiritual circles as the hallmark of healing. But Carl Jung never glorified forced virtue. He emphasized wholeness, not goodness. And wholeness means holding the light and the dark, the love and the rage, the desire to move on and the need to grieve. It means giving yourself permission to feel everything without judgment, because judgment delays healing. But compassion, raw, non-performative compassion, is what unearths the gold buried beneath the pain. Jung called it the gold in the shadow, and you're finding it now, in the refusal to fake forgiveness, in the decision to meet your pain where it lives, not where it's convenient. You've been told your pain is too much, that you're too sensitive, that you need to let it go. But here's the truth, your pain is not the problem. The problem is how you were never given a safe space to process it. And so it stayed. It stayed in your body. It stayed in your relationships. It stayed in your dreams. It whispered to you during moments of joy, reminding you not to get too close to happiness. That's how trauma works. It's not just the event, it's the absence of repair, the silence that followed, the dismissal, the gaslighting, the normalization of emotional abandonment. And you survived all of it, maybe silently, maybe screaming into pillows, maybe laughing through tears, but you survived. And now that you've survived, the next step isn't to erase the past. The next step is to honor it without becoming it. And that's why you must stop punishing yourself. Because every time you self-sabotage, every time you downplay your needs, every time you shrink to be more likable, you're doing their job for them. You're continuing a punishment that was never yours to begin with. And it's time to end that. Ending that means boundaries. It means grief. It means learning to be disliked by the people who benefited from your silence. It means no longer bending so others don't break. It means giving your inner child the justice she never got. Not through revenge, not through confrontation, but through unconditional self-loyalty. Through saying, I believe you. You didn't deserve that. Through waking up and choosing peace not with them, but with yourself. That's the only peace that lasts. And when the urge to forgive shows up again, ask yourself, am I doing this from a place of freedom or fear? Because if you're doing it to be seen as a good person, that's not healing. That's performance. That's persona. Jung said the persona is a system of behavior we adopt to make a definite impression upon others. But healing demands the end of performance. It asks you to be real, not respectable, honest, not admired, free, not approved of, and only then does true peace become possible. You may never get the apology, you may never get closure, but you get to choose what happens next. You get to choose not to carry the poison that someone else injected into your spirit. You get to look in the mirror and say, this ends with me. Not because you forgave them, but because you remembered your worth. Because you refused to keep hurting yourself in the name of healing. Because you stopped equating compassion with self-destruction. That's not forgiveness. That's awakening. So let this be the beginning of something sacred. The quiet rebellion of a soul who refuses to abandon themselves again. Not for love, not for peace, not even for forgiveness. Because what you need now is not to become light. What you need is to become whole. And becoming whole is not a process of returning to who you once were. It is the birth of someone entirely new. Someone forged through heartbreak, confusion, and the silent wars you fought when no one was watching. And as strange as it sounds, your refusal to forgive too soon is the very foundation of your integrity. It means you are finally telling yourself the truth. Not a spiritualized version of it, not a moralized version of it, but your truth. And your truth is valid, even if it's ugly, even if it's angry, even if it doesn't fit the mold of what people expect from a healed person. Carl Jung understood this well. That transformation is not polite. It is not tidy. It is not linear. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he said. And that pain is not a mistake. It is not a detour. It is the very path. And the pain you've been carrying, the kind that wakes you at night, the kind that makes your chest tighten when certain memories flash, is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that your soul is waking up to what it was never meant to carry. Because the truth is, you were never meant to be the one to forgive them. You were meant to be the one who finally forgave yourself for believing that it was your fault. This is where the story changes. Not because they changed, but because you did. Because you're no longer trying to fix what someone else broke in you by being more loving, more forgiving, more understanding than what they ever offered you. You are finally turning your love inward. And that kind of love, it's not soft. It's fierce. It's the kind of love that says, I see what they did. I see how long I've suffered. And I will not abandon myself for anyone, not anymore. You don't need them to acknowledge it. You don't need them to come back and say, you were right. Because now you know you were right to hurt. You were right to feel betrayed. You were right to hold back forgiveness until your soul was ready. And maybe it never will be. And that's okay. Forgiveness is not a badge. It's not a requirement. It's a choice. And sometimes the more loving choice is not to forgive. Sometimes the more loving choice is to walk away from the whole damn cycle and start over with yourself. And when you do, something shifts in your energy. You no longer attract people who mirror your wounds. You begin to recognize peace not as the absence of conflict, but the presence of self-respect. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't care to understand. You stop waiting for closure and become the one who closes the door. Not with hatred, but with clarity. with finality, with the quiet strength that says, I don't need to be okay with what happened. I just need to be okay with who I am now. And who you are now is someone who sees, someone who knows the cost of self-betrayal, someone who understands that love without self-respect is not love, it's bondage. That compassion without boundaries is not noble, it's dangerous. That forgiveness without justice is not healing, it's submission. You are someone who has come through fire and chosen to rise, not in spite of your pain, but because of it. Jung spoke often of the process of individuation, the becoming of the self. It is not the pursuit of perfection, but the reconciliation of all that you are. The light, the shadow, the rage, the softness, the brokenness, the beauty, the grief. All of it belongs. And when you stop punishing yourself, you create the space for all of it to live without shame. You become the container for your own wholeness. And suddenly you realize you never needed forgiveness to be free. You only needed to come home to yourself. This is the moment you come home. This is the moment you stop searching for the right way to feel and just feel. This is the moment you sit with your younger self, the one who never got an apology, and tell them you didn't deserve it. And I will never abandon you again. This is the moment you remove the burden from your chest and say, I don't have to forgive them. I just need to stop hurting myself on their behalf. And that, more than anything, is what healing truly is. So take a breath. Let it all go, not because they're worth it, but because you are. Let go of the guilt. Let go of the shame. Let go of the need to rise above when all you ever needed was to rise within. You've carried this pain long enough, and now it's time to carry something else yourself. You were never too much. That was just the lie you were told by people who couldn't handle your truth. And for years, you bent yourself into smaller shapes, edited your emotions, softened your voice, and blamed yourself for being too intense, too emotional, too unforgiving. But what you are is awake, aware, sensitive in the most sacred way. And that sensitivity, that deep awareness of emotional nuance is not a flaw. It's your power. It's what kept you from becoming like them. And now it's what will guide you home if you let it. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He said, your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And when you look inside, when you really allow yourself to sit in your pain without trying to erase it or dress it up as wisdom, you'll begin to see what that pain has been trying to tell you. It has never wanted you to stay bitter. It has only wanted you to be heard. It's not asking you to forgive. It's asking you to acknowledge, to witness, to validate. And that is what ends the cycle, not forced grace, but deep inner honesty. You see, when you keep trying to forgive too soon, you're still unconsciously making them the center of your healing journey. And that's the trap. That's what keeps you orbiting their gravity long after they're gone. That's what keeps you asking questions that can't be answered. Why did they do that? Did they ever love me? Do they even care? And those questions only deepen the wound, because they're not yours to answer. They never were. The real question is, why did you keep hurting yourself on their behalf? And maybe now you're beginning to understand. Because the moment you stop making their redemption your responsibility is the moment you begin to reclaim your life. And that reclamation is not loud. It doesn't require confrontation. It happens in the smallest, most sacred choices. When you speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. When you say no and don't explain why. When you rest without guilt. When you allow your pain to be just that pain without turning it into a story of weakness. That's how you stop punishing yourself. That's how you begin again. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be healed to deserve rest, love, or peace. You don't need to forgive anyone to earn your own grace. Because grace isn't something you earn. It's something you remember. It's something you return to like a home that was always waiting for you to stop running. And that home, that stillness, is where your power lives. Not in your ability to transcend, but in your ability to feel. And to still choose yourself in the middle of the storm. The truth is, some people will never say sorry. Some will continue to twist the narrative to make themselves the victim. Some will ghost disappear or pretend you never existed. And if you wait for them to make it right, you will stay stuck forever. You will stay frozen in a story they abandoned long ago. But you have a choice now, a sacred choice. To unfreeze, to thaw, to grieve what you never got. To stop trying to be okay and start being real. Because healing is not about transcending your humanity, it's about inhabiting it fully, courageously, tenderly. It's about walking back into the rooms of your soul you boarded up because they reminded you of pain. It's about opening the door to the parts of you that feel rage, grief, betrayal, and saying you belong here too. That's what makes you whole. Not forgiveness, but inclusion, integration, not abandoning the parts of you that still hurt just to seem enlightened. Jung's path was never about perfection. It was about union, inner alignment, soul honesty. So let this be the moment you stop using forgiveness as a way to earn peace, and instead allow peace to arrive through truth, through the radical act of saying, I am no longer available for self-abandonment. Let this be the moment you reclaim your time, your story, your tenderness. Let this be the moment you declare that your healing will no longer center around their redemption, but around your return, to your voice, to your body, to your worth. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're just finally waking up. And the pain you feel, it's not regression. It's resurrection. It's your soul remembering what it feels like to stand on your own side. Maybe for the first time. Maybe for the 1,000th. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here now, breathing differently, seeing clearly, no longer asking how to forgive them, but how to stop hurting yourself for what they never had the courage to face. And in that shift, so small, so profound, you begin again. There's a strange kind of silence that follows this kind of awakening. A silence that isn't empty, but full of clarity, full of truth, full of the subtle, sacred recognition that you don't need to explain your pain anymore, that you don't need to convince anyone why you still tremble, why you still remember why you stopped trying to forgive. Because forgiveness was never the path, it was a byproduct. And the real path was always about coming back to yourself, slowly, gently, honestly. And when you do that, you'll notice something. The guilt starts to fade. The shame starts to dissolve. And the only thing left is you finally breathing in a body that no longer feels like a battlefield. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming who you are doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with permission. The permission to stop pretending, to stop rushing your process, to stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. You were not born to be palatable. You were not born to be a peacekeeper in someone else's war. You were born to be whole. And wholeness is messy. It's raw. It's imperfect. And that's exactly why it's real. You may still feel the echo of their voice in your mind. The one that blamed you, minimized. You twisted the truth. But now you get to respond. Not to them, but to yourself. You get to say, that wasn't love. That wasn't respect. That wasn't my fault. And the moment you speak those words, really speak them from your bones, you reclaim the power they stole from you. Not because they gave it back, but because you no longer need them to. That's the most liberating part of this journey, realizing you don't need them to change for you to be free. You don't need their apology, their confession, their regret, because you've stopped living in a story that centers around their growth, and you've started writing one that centers around your truth. That truth may still ache. It may still bleed, but at least it's yours, and anything that is yours can be healed, but only when you stop punishing yourself in the name of their silence. Some people will never see what they did to you. Not because it wasn't real, but because seeing it would shatter the illusions they've built around themselves. And so they run, they deny, they pretend. And that's okay. Let them. You don't need to chase them down the road of their avoidance. You're not meant to be the mirror for someone else's healing. You're meant to be the guardian of your own. And being that guardian means setting boundaries not just with others, but with your own mind. With the part of you that keeps returning to the scene of the crime, hoping it'll end differently. It won't. What will change, though, is what you do with that memory, what you do with that pain, what you do with the part of you that still flinches when kindness feels foreign, when safety feels suspicious. You don't need to fix that part. You just need to hold it, sit beside it, and say, I see you. I'm here. I won't leave. Because the wound begins to close the moment it no longer feels alone. And maybe, just maybe one day, the forgiveness you were chasing will arrive, quietly. Not because you forced it, but because you no longer need it to feel whole. Because the part of you that was demanding closure has finally been witnessed. Not by them, but by you. And in that witnessing, something profound occurs. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but freedom. A freedom that says, I remember what happened, and I still choose to love myself anyway. You don't have to be okay with what happened. You just have to be okay with who you are now. And who you are now is someone who survived, someone who is learning to thrive, someone who no longer carries the burden of being the forgiver, the fixer, the saint. You are someone who feels deeply, loves honestly, and no longer trades your soul for acceptance. And that is more than enough. So let them go, not in bitterness, but in sacred indifference. Let the need for closure dissolve into the present moment. Let the old stories fall away. Let yourself be here now, alive, awake, unburdened. Not because they changed, but because you did. You can feel it now, can't you? The shift. It's quiet, almost imperceptible, like the first deep breath after a storm. No applause, no revelation, just space, spaciousness in your chest, stillness where there was once tension. And in that space, something extraordinary is happening. You are no longer trapped in the loop of needing to be okay. You're no longer stuck in the role of the one who has to forgive, heal, fix, or transcend. You're just here with your truth. And for the first time, that's enough. You start noticing how you move through the world differently. Not harder, not colder, but clearer. You speak more slowly. You protect your time. You don't explain yourself as much. And it's not arrogance. It's not detachment. It's just the absence of shame. The absence of that internal critic who used to scream at you for not being over it fast enough. That voice starts to fade when you stop punishing yourself, when you stop telling yourself that your pain is an inconvenience or your anger is a sign of failure. Carl Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And for years, your unconscious has been shaped by the need to make peace with what hurt you. But now you're beginning to understand that peace doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes peace is boundaries. Sometimes peace is walking away. Sometimes peace is no longer needing to be understood by the very people who misunderstood you most. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And there will still be days when the grief returns unexpectedly, ruthlessly. You'll hear a song, see a familiar face, smell a scent that sends your nervous system spiraling back to that moment. And in those moments, you'll be tempted to shame yourself again. Why am I still not over this? But you'll catch it. You'll pause. And you'll remember healing isn't linear. It's cyclical. It loops back, not to punish you, but to offer you deeper layers of truth, deeper layers of self-love, deeper layers of sovereignty. You will learn to greet your triggers with compassion, not resistance. You will learn to say, of course, I still hurt. What happened mattered. And I matter. You will learn to stop performing your healing and start embodying it, quietly, authentically, without the need to prove to anyone that you're better, because you're no longer trying to get back to who you were before the pain. You're becoming someone entirely new, someone who sees their scars not as shame, but as sacred. And what a beautiful thing it is to become your own home, to stop waiting for others to make things right, to stop waiting for apologies that will never come, to stop editing your story so that others can digest it more easily, to stop begging for a justice that only you can give yourself. You are not the sum of what they did to you. You are the sum of what you did with it, how you carried it, how you sat with it, how you broke open, not down. And yes, there may still be days when the old pain whispers in your ear. But now you have an answer. I don't have to forgive them. I just need to stop punishing myself. That is the sacred boundary, the emotional severance, the healing cord you draw in the sand. Not to sever your humanity, but to restore it. Not to be right, but to be whole. And in this new wholeness, you begin to trust again, not them, but yourself. You trust your instincts, your timing, your ability to say no, your right to grieve, your right to walk away, your right to not make peace with the past until it makes peace with you. And maybe it never will. And maybe that's okay. Because you're not here to rewrite their story. You're here to reclaim yours. And now this is where it ends. Not the pain entirely, no, because some echoes never leave us. But the part of you that kept holding the blade against your own skin in the name of forgiveness, that part has finally put it down. This is the ending of self-blame, the ending of spiritual pressure, the ending of emotional gymnastics that demanded you twist your suffering into something beautiful before you were ever allowed to just feel it. This is the moment you exhale the last breath you were holding for someone who never deserved your silence. You don't have to forgive them. Maybe you never will. And that doesn't make you less spiritual. It doesn't make you less evolved. It makes you real. It makes you someone who sees clearly. Someone who has decided that inner peace will not be another performance, another mask, another sacrifice at the altar of someone else's comfort. You've performed enough. You've forgiven enough. You've swallowed your truth enough. And now you're choosing you. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And this is what you're becoming, someone who understands that healing is not a destination. It is a relationship with yourself that must be rebuilt in the wake of every betrayal, every heartbreak, every moment where you gave your tenderness to those who treated it like weakness. And it starts not with forgiving them, but by forgiving yourself for all the times you didn't yet know how to walk away. For all the times you thought their rejection was a reflection of your worth. For all the nights you stayed up wondering what you did wrong. For all the second chances you gave to people who never deserved a first. For every time you apologized for your own survival. You didn't know, but now you do. And when you know better, not just in your mind, but in your bones, you become better. You become less available to the patterns that once broke you. You become less seduced by the illusion of closure. You stop reaching for the hand that struck you. You stop romanticizing the wound. And slowly you realize something revolutionary. The only forgiveness you ever truly needed was your own. Your story doesn't need a redemption arc that includes your abusers. Your growth doesn't need to be validated by the very people who caused your pain. You don't have to offer understanding to people who never tried to understand you. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is to look at the past with fierce, unflinching honesty and say, that was not okay. And still keep going, still keep loving, still keep choosing yourself day by day, breath by breath. That's the work. That's the awakening. That's the liberation. And one day someone will ask how you healed, and you'll tell them the truth. Not a polished version, not a sugar-coated tale of forgiveness and transcendence. You'll say, I stopped punishing myself for what I didn't deserve. I stopped bleeding so others could feel whole. I stopped confusing kindness with compliance. I stopped waiting for someone else's change to validate my own worth. I looked my shadow in the eye. I let it speak. I let it scream. I let it cry. And I listened. I didn't fix it. I didn't forgive it. I just stopped hiding from it. And that was enough. So if you're here now, at the end of this journey, know this, you made it. Not to some final point of healing, but to the moment where you finally said, I choose myself. And that choice will never betray you. That choice will never abandon you. That choice will never ask you to shrink, to rush to forgive before you're ready. That choice is your rebirth. And maybe one day forgiveness will come, and maybe it won't. But either way, you'll be okay, because now your healing no longer depends on their accountability. It depends only on your willingness to live in alignment with your truth. No more punishments, no more proving, no more pleasing. Just you, whole, awake, free.
Imagine this. You wake one morning, and before the light even fully enters your eyes, you notice the quiet disorder breathing in your home. Clothes draped over a chair like forgotten versions of yourself. Dishes stacked in small monuments to yesterday's fatigue. Dust collecting in the corners as if time itself has decided to stay there with you. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later, but later is the ghost that never comes. Something deeper than laziness has you bound. It's not neglect. It's a dialogue beneath awareness, what Carl Jung would have called an unconscious conversation between your soul and the world it has created. Your house is not merely a space you live in. It is a living extension of your psyche. Each corner, each forgotten object, is a fragment of your inner landscape. When you refuse to clean, you are not avoiding dirt, you are avoiding yourself. You are turning away from the parts of you that ache to be seen, from thoughts you've buried beneath the emotional carpet that hides the terrain of your daily life. Pause for a moment. Before continuing, whisper this word to yourself, rebirth. Not as a cliche, but as a ritual. Because to clean, to organize, to heal, is to be born again from the inside. Each movement of your hand, each act of renewal, carries a symbolic pulse. The decision to release the old chaos that no longer resonates with your becoming. When you write or even think that word rebirth, something subtle shifts inside. The unconscious stirs. It begins to awaken to new energy, new forms of being, new beginnings waiting to unfold. The simple act of intention, when done consciously, sets fire to invisible layers of the self. That's how transformation always begins, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consent. Because cleaning, in truth, is not about order. It's about relationship, a dialogue between what you can see and what you can't. Jung said, "What we deny controls us. What we accept transforms us. The mess is never just mess. It is the outer echo of an inner resistance. Your mind mirrors your environment, the way a lake mirrors the sky. When the surface is still, it reflects clearly. When disturbed, everything fractures into distortion. Look at your room for a moment, not as a physical place, but as a symbolic map. That pile of clothes you keep meaning to fold might be the embodiment of postponed choices. The unwashed plates echoes of conversations avoided. The dust in the corners, the quiet fear of aging, of death, of the things we prefer not to name. Every object out of place is a thought left unintegrated, a whisper from the unconscious saying, 'Hear me.' The aesthetic doesn't matter. What matters is psychic energy." Jung believed that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and disorder is one of its most direct languages. Your house is always talking, not with words, but through form, silence, and decay. The clutter is not neutral. It hums with meaning. We normalize chaos because it's familiar. We romanticize it as creative or harmless. Yet somewhere inside, the psyche grows restless because the soul hungers for coherence. When the world outside you becomes tangled, your inner world follows suit. The outer mess is not an aesthetic flaw. It is a mirror to the confusion of your mind. Avoiding cleaning is an unconscious act of rebellion, a protest against control, against facing emotion, against the structure of being awake. It is also a symptom of exhaustion, a psyche so fragmented it can no longer summon the will to reorder its world. Jung described the process of individuation as the sacred journey of integrating all the parts of the self, even the shadowed ones. Cleaning, then, becomes a symbolic act of individuation. Each stroke of order is a reconciliation between consciousness and chaos. Every time you wipe away dust, you are touching something ancient inside the archetype of purification that lives in every culture, every ritual. To clean is to make sacred again what has been forgotten. To order your surroundings is to give form to your soul's disarray. Yet when you cannot move, when even small tasks feel unbearable, it isn't procrastination. It's a disconnection between the conscious self and the deeper psyche. Your environment ceases to be a home and becomes an invisible battleground where unspoken emotions clash in silence. Perhaps you tell yourself it's nothing, just laziness, lack of time, lack of discipline. But watch what happens the moment you finally act. The body bends, the hands move, and suddenly the air changes. The tension begins to dissolve. Each gesture becomes a kind of therapy. As you clean, you don't just rearrange objects, you realign energy. The mind breathes again. You rediscover space inside and out. But it's not easy. Because cleaning means staying long enough to hear the silence speak. It means being alone with yourself, and that frightens most people. Disorder is comfortable because it is noisy. It protects you from introspection. It's a refuge for those who fear the void. Yet the void, the stillness, is where all healing begins. Your home is the mirror of your unconscious. When there is disorder outside, confusion reigns inside. When there is clarity outside, serenity arises within. It's no coincidence that people begin to tidy their spaces just when they're ready for transformation. The soul uses everyday gestures as symbols of rebirth. Sometimes sweeping the floor is a prayer whispered in motion. There is a strange darkness in the refusal to clean. The disorder becomes a ritual of pain, a way of clinging to crisis, of unconsciously declaring, "I'm not yet ready to move forward." Jung would have called it ego resistance, the mind's attempt to delay transformation. But here lies the paradox. The moment you start, even hesitantly, you awaken the process. Cleaning changes frequency. It shifts the vibration of a space, and with it, your emotional resonance. You feel it in your breathing, in the light, in the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming your skin. Cleaning, then, is not a domestic act. It's a psychological ritual, a conversation between your hands and your hidden self. The true question is not why you dislike cleaning your house, but what part of yourself you fear discovering once everything is finally in order. There is a secret most people never name. The mess in your home is not random. It is a symbolic pattern, a living message from the unconscious, written in the alphabet of dust and delay. Each misplaced thing has its own frequency, its own story. Jung would have smiled at this. He believed that the psyche never stops speaking, even when the mouth is silent. The house, then, becomes the dream you walk through while awake. Disorder is not merely chaos, it is communication. Your psyche uses clutter as a code, a material mirror of inner imbalance. What you avoid cleaning becomes the exact thing your soul wants to reveal. The dishes whisper, "You have not finished digesting yesterday's emotion." The pile of paper murmurs, "You've postponed decisions for too long." The closed door says, "Behind me lies what you cannot yet face." Modern neuroscience, in its own way, supports this Jungian truth. When the brain perceives disorder, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning and focus, begins to overload. The limbic system interprets that overload as threat. You feel unease, not because the room is messy, but because your inner sense of safety is disrupted. The chaos outside activates the chaos within. Yet we often justify it. "I'm just messy. I work better this way." But the psyche knows these are masks. To live in chaos is to dwell in denial. It's the ego's strategy to protect itself from the deeper work, the work of reconciliation. Because true order requires surrender. There's a strange comfort in the disorder we create. It's familiar, predictable. It gives us something to complain about, something to blame when the silence grows too large. Jung called this shadow resistance, the tendency to stay tangled in the very suffering we wish to escape, simply because it feels like home. Observe yourself. When you're sad, your room darkens. When you're anxious, objects scatter. When you're lost, everything seems heavy and slow. The environment does not simply reflect you, it responds to you. Matter and mind are not separate realms. They are in dialogue, dancing through what Jung named synchronicity, the invisible threads linking inner and outer events. You may think cleaning is about control. In truth, disorder often is control, a covert rebellion against being told what to do, even by yourself. Deep down, you might associate order with authority, with the cold structure of a childhood that demanded perfection. So the mess becomes your unspoken protest, your small revolution against oppression. Yet rebellion quickly turns to imprisonment when it becomes habit. Look closer at how you accumulate things. Each unnecessary object you keep is a frozen thought, a relic of a feeling you refuse to process. You hold on to the physical because you fear the emotional void it hides. The drawer you never open, the box you never unpack. These are not storage spaces, they are psychic tombs. Jung said that the soul clings to symbols when it cannot face reality. To declutter is therefore to release a version of yourself that no longer exists. Water, the ancient symbol of the unconscious, appears each time you clean the sink, the bucket, the gentle rinse. Water transforms. It dissolves boundaries. Jung saw it as the element of psychic renewal. When you let the water run, you participate in an archetypal ritual older than civilization. The washing away of psychic residue. Each drop carries fragments of the old self, returning them to the flow of life. The sound of the broom against the floor, the rhythm of folding, the breath between movements, all of it forms a silent mantra. Cleaning becomes meditation in motion. Your body, mind, and breath synchronize into presence. You stop existing in the future or the past. You return to the now that narrow bridge where consciousness and the soul finally meet. A cluttered space traps time. It holds you in yesterday's emotional gravity. Jung often wrote that people who cannot let go of objects are not materialistic, they are haunted. Haunted by the self they were when they first touched those things. Every object carries psychic weight. When you lift it, you lift your history. When you release it, you release the energy bound to it. Even light behaves differently in a clean room. Notice that how clarity multiplies, how air feels younger. That is not illusion. It's the nervous system responding to coherence. A clean environment signals safety, and safety allows the psyche to unfold. The ancient temples knew this. Their spaces were designed to mirror inner clarity. To purify the outer world was to invoke the sacred within. And yet, the deepest resistance to cleaning does not come from the body, but from self-worth. What you do not clean, you secretly believe you do not deserve. Jung described this as the saboteur archetype, the inner force that destroys what would make us whole. We neglect our homes, not because we are lazy, but because somewhere inside we've concluded we are not worthy of peace. But something miraculous happens the moment you move a single object with intention. The psyche recognizes it. The soul rises. The gesture says, I choose life again. And suddenly what once felt impossible becomes movement. Cleaning, then, is not a chore. It is an act of dignity. A quiet rebellion against the part of you that says you don't matter. When you clean with awareness, you are not fixing a room, you are realigning a universe. Picture this. A woman named Elena stands in the center of her apartment, sunlight slipping through half-closed curtains. The air is heavy, but not just with dust, with memory. For months she has promised herself she'll clean, and each morning she repeats the same soft deception. Later. Yet later is where the soul goes to hide. Jung would say Elena isn't fighting against laziness. She's wrestling with the unconscious, that deep ancient reservoir where unspoken truths sink and wait. Her house is not disordered by chance. It is an X-ray of her psyche, an emotional weather map written across objects. The table covered in papers, abandoned intentions. The bed unmade, the mind unable to rest. The closed windows, fear of illumination. The mirror streaked a self-image blurred by neglect. Nothing in her space is accidental. The outer mess mirrors the inner fragmentation. The psyche externalizes what it cannot yet integrate, turning matter into metaphor. Jung called this process projection, when the unconscious expresses itself outwardly to be seen, because inwardly it feels unbearable. The home becomes a symbolic stage for this performance. Every object plays a role, every corner whispers. Here lies a part of you still waiting. The act of cleaning, therefore, is not mundane, it's mythic. In ancient temples, before any ritual began, the priests purified the ground. They swept the dust not for cleanliness, but for sanctity. In Japanese Zen monasteries, monks clean the temple each morning as an act of devotion. Jung saw these rituals as the psyche's way of reenacting cosmic order. To cleanse is to restore the link between chaos and creation. Modern neuroscience, too, notes that repetitive movements calm the amygdala, the brain's center of fear. That's why the sound of scrubbing or the rhythm of folding can feel meditative. It's not the cleanliness itself that heals, but the symbolic rhythm of it, movement transforming stagnation, matter responding to intention. When you pick up a cloth, the unconscious feels it. It's as if your inner self recognizes a shift, a signal that says, I'm ready to face myself again. The body begins to assist the soul. Breathing steadies, thoughts loosen. The hands, once heavy, find their own intelligence. The psyche begins to move through you like a current. Cleaning ceases to be a task. It becomes an embodiment of healing. Jung might have described this as active imagination in motion, a conversation between the conscious and the unconscious enacted through physical gesture. Each act of order becomes dialogue, each wiped surface an answered question. There is something alchemical in this. The ancient alchemists, whom Jung studied closely, believed that transforming matter was also transforming the self. They sought gold, but found soul. The soot of the furnace became a mirror for their inner darkness. Likewise, the dust you clean is not filth, it's psychic residue, the ashes of forgotten experiences. When you wipe them away with awareness, you perform alchemy. You turn matter into meaning. Notice what happens as you continue. The air feels lighter, the room begins to breathe, the mirror clears, and for a moment you see your reflection, not perfect but real. Jung said that one does not become enlightened by imagining light, but by making darkness conscious. Cleaning is precisely that. A gentle confrontation with what you have ignored. And sometimes, as Elena cleans, she cries not from sadness, but from release. The tears are her psyche melting back into movement. What once was stagnant begins to flow. Water, again, the great symbol of the unconscious, carries her emotions into motion. She doesn't force it. She simply follows the rhythm. Then something subtle shifts. The silence changes. It's no longer oppressive, but alive. The air hums with renewal. The floor she cleans becomes a threshold, each sweep of the broom a prayer. Because cleaning, in its purest form, is not about perfection. It's about dialogue. Between what has been and what can be. Between the self that resists and the self that is becoming. Jung believed that symbols are bridges. When you clean with presence, you walk across that bridge from the unconscious to the conscious world. You translate emotion into movement, chaos into order, shadow into awareness. And here lies the paradox of transformation. You don't clean to feel better, you begin to feel better, therefore you can clean. The change starts inside. The energy of renewal precedes the act itself. The house responds to you because it is you. As Elena finishes, she opens the window. Light spills in, dust dances in the air like tiny galaxies. It is no longer something to remove, but something to witness the material proof of life in motion. Even the dust, when caught by sunlight, becomes beautiful. Jung would have called that moment integration, when shadow and light coexist, when even what was once rejected becomes part of the whole. So the ritual of cleansing is not about reaching an end, it is about remembering that everything you touch touches you back. Each gesture of care realigns the psyche. Each breath taken in a clean space is an act of return. A return to wholeness, to presence, to the living conversation between matter and soul. There comes a moment after the dust has settled and the air feels new again, when silence begins to speak in a different language. It no longer accuses or reminds, it breathes. In that stillness, something stirs beneath the surface of the self, like a tide turning after years of hesitation. That movement is not merely satisfaction at a clean space. It is the psyche awakening to its own reflection, finally recognizing its face in the mirror of the home. Jung called this the return to the self, the deepest archetype, the center around which all opposites seek balance. You don't find it in books or meditations, you find it in these quiet, unguarded moments, when the world outside synchronizes with the world within. When the house no longer feels like a burden, but like a living temple, a mirror polished by your own consciousness. Cleaning was never about control, it was about integration. You have not banished the shadow, you have invited it to sit beside you. That, Jung would say, is true healing, not denying darkness, but seeing it illuminated by your own willingness to look. And the strange beauty of it all is that transformation always begins in the smallest gesture. You didn't start by conquering the chaos. You began with one surface, one drawer, one act of presence. But from that movement, a wave expanded through objects, through space, through thought. Neuroscience calls this the feedback loop of embodiment. When you change the physical, the neural circuits of emotion follow. Jung would have called it synchronicity, the psyche and the world moving in tandem, each echoing the other's evolution. Now the house breathes differently because you breathe differently. You notice the weight in your chest has lifted, not because life became easier, but because you began to inhabit it consciously. What was once clutter now feels like an old story, finally told. The energy that was trapped there has returned to motion. You can feel it in your spine, your breath, the rhythm of your heartbeat aligning with the pulse of the room. In myth, rebirth always follows descent. Orpheus enters the underworld to bring back his lost beloved. The phoenix must burn before it rises. The psyche works the same way. Only by confronting what has been buried, the forgotten, the denied, the feared, can it renew itself. The dust you faced was never just domestic, it was archetypal. You descended into the underworld of your own disorder and returned with light. Jung once said that the gods have become diseases, meaning the archetypes, when not honored consciously, express themselves as symptoms. The neglected home, the fatigue, the endless postponement, all are ways the soul cries for recognition. When you clean, you don't cure a symptom. You restore a god to its rightful place. You honor the instinct for renewal that civilization forgot. Every culture has a ritual of purification, bathing in rivers, burning incense, sweeping thresholds before celebration. These are not superstitions, they are psychological technologies. Acts that externalize the invisible process of transformation. When you sweep your floor, you repeat an ancient pattern, the human attempt to turn chaos into cosmos. And yet, the most sacred part of cleaning is not the result, but the awareness it leaves behind, the realization that your surroundings are never passive. They are extensions of your psyche, mirrors for your myths. Every room, every object, every scent carries symbolic resonance. The bedroom holds your intimacy, the kitchen your power to transform, the bathroom your capacity for purification, the hallway your recurring thoughts, the window your relationship with light. When these spaces align, the psyche feels whole. So when you next feel resistance, that inner voice whispering, "Not today, don't call it failure," listen to it. That voice belongs to a part of you still afraid of clarity. Jung would call it a complex and autonomous fragment of the psyche clinging to its old narrative. Meet it with compassion. Ask it gently, "What are you protecting me from?" Because resistance is never the enemy. It is the threshold guard of transformation. And as you continue to dwell in this awareness, you realize something profound. The true goal was never to have a perfect house. It was to restore conversation between your consciousness and your soul, between the order you can touch and the mystery you can only feel. You start to move differently in your space. Your gestures slow. You place things with care, not out of obligation, but reverence. The home becomes an ecosystem of meaning. Each corner hums with life. Even the smallest imperfections, a scuff, a scratch, a dent, feel like marks of presence, proof that life has passed through here and left its signature. And then there's the silence again, but now it feels kind. It's the silence of alignment, not avoidance. The same silence that follows a storm when the earth finally exhales. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant this moment, the quiet recognition that you are not a collection of parts, but a single living process unfolding through time. Cleaning was just the visible form of it. The real work happened beneath the skin of matter, in the reweaving of meaning. So look around, the light touches the walls differently now. The room feels larger, not because you added space, but because you removed resistance. What once was heavy now feels sacred. You are not simply in your home, you are within yourself. And when the time comes again, when dust gathers, when chaos returns, as it always does, you'll know what it truly asks of you. Not perfection, not discipline, only attention. Attention is the first prayer, presence is the only ritual. And through these simple, humble acts, the soul is reborn quietly, invisibly, inevitably.